Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, UCAP and AIRA Project for this platform. My name is Lovette Jallow. Some of you know of me, and I am a 9-time award-winning author. A lot of those awards are for my humanitarian work across continents, and I work as an inclusion strategist, which is a very funny title to have because a lot of my work is on many different dimensions, and one of them happens to be in AI ethics and bias, as well as disability justice, because I happen to be a Black autistic ADHD woman who also works in healthcare and doing a lot of research work, as well as building and advising AI companies. So some of the methods that are out today, because of NDAs, can't be mentioned, but I help work with them and doing and producing guardrails for us who are disabled to be able to use them. Because I am, well, very good at examining through an intersectional lens how inequality and racism is reproduced through digital systems in work and support contexts. Because as we know, we live in a society that's very hierarchical, and Black women who are disabled, we have a particular pattern recognition system that can see everyone else, but everyone else are not very good at seeing us. So let's give you a scenario, a productivity app, for example, which promises to help you manage your workload. It tracks how focused you are. It suggests optimal break times. It flags shifts in your communication patterns. Now, for an autistic worker, for example, this sounds like accommodation, right? Until your manager receives a dashboard showing that you are underperforming because you batch process emails instead of responding immediately. This becomes a surveillance creep. It kind of slides from an access tool to a control system. And for many autistic workers, especially those of us who live at the intersection of race, class, gender, and disability, this isn't just uncomfortable. It becomes what I like to call structural coercion of a sort, disguised by some as support. So today I'm going to talk about how this happens, who it harms the most, and what we can do to sort of dismantle it. Because this surveillance creep happens in a few predictable stages. And this is where I get called in to companies, to organizations, and to look at where did this policy fail? And the first stage that this happens is basically the access promise, that everyone loves to use that word access. Someone hasn't muted their mic. Please do double check that. See, sometimes AI is introduced as accommodation. We have communication aids, task managers, focus tools, productivity trackers, and it's pitched to people as autonomy and support. And we do initial data collection, and it seems very reasonable. We just need to understand your work patterns to help you. And as always, autistic workers, disabled workers, especially those of us who come from marginalized communities, also known as global majority. This promise is very seductive because we have been taught our entire lives to adapt, to track ourselves, to prove we're trying hard enough. Black and brown autistic children especially, they learn early that non-compliance will lead to punishment. So when they are offered tools to help conform, we are going to say yes. So here is what they don't tell you. These systems are often built in predominantly white teams, using data sets that treat white neurotypical behavior, dominant, as the universal standard. And when AI learns that professional communication, well, or productive work patterns, what it looks like, well, it's learning from a data that already excludes us or codes us as deviant in an already deviant minority. So that access promise becomes what we call a Trojan horse. For those of you who like to read the Odyssey. So what enters as assistance carries already built-in surveillance infrastructure designed around norms that were never ours. Now, stage 2 becomes the boundary shift, because once that Trojan horse is deployed, data collection expands beyond that original scope. That focus tracker now monitors your email response times. The task manager shares completion rates to the supervisor. The optional weekly check-ins become mandatory, and every expansion is framed as improvement. This just helps us support you better. And this is where consent becomes fiction. See, you agreed to the original tool, but did you agree to version 2.0 and 3.0? And there is no meaningful way to renegotiate, because if you refuse that upgrade, you might lose that accommodation entirely. The boundaries that were promised at deployment, they're going to dissolve over time. And you now have a spiky profile, and that's code for being difficult. Then enters stage 3. Now the system is embedded in performance management, team coordination, organizational surveillance. Opting out isn't just removing a tool, it's removing yourself from how work gets done. The so-called assistive AI has become the infrastructure of control. At this stage, many workers have an impossible choice: accept the comprehensive monitoring or accept being called and labeled difficult. What I love the most, resistant to feedback, which I have to read once I come in. Or my absolute favorite, you are not a team player. The accommodation you were promised now demands surrendering your privacy, autonomy, or even your right to work without constant oversight. And this is the endpoint of surveillance creep. This is why I call this talk surveillance creep. This is how that support becomes a system of control. And we have to say, well, we're not data sources, we're not performance metrics, we are human beings, we are workers with rights. Now, who gets hurt the most? Because it's difficult, but I like to track numbers. Even though I have this calculia, I love numbers when it comes to humans. I want us to think about intersectional amplification. See, we're not all impacted equally. Surveillance creep does not affect all autistic workers, disabled workers equally. So let me be explicit about who faces what we know as compounded harm. Black autistic workers are funneled into behavior monitoring systems that's trained on racist data. These systems are built, again, by predominantly white teams using data sets that treat white neurotypical behavior as the standard. So when AI learns what normal workplace behavior looks like, it's learning from data that already excludes Black and brown people and codes us as deviant. So when AI flags concerning communication patterns or low engagement, it's penalizing cultural communication styles. It's not penalizing actual performance. Because guess who is being monitored more intensively, punished more harshly for the same behaviors that earn white workers' praise? Now, I know this personally. As a Black autistic woman, I've seen AI systems flag my direct communication as aggressive, whilst white colleagues, well, they're praised for being so clear. That surveillance is not neutral. AI is not neutral. It weaponizes existing racism into algorithmic punishment. And my most famous quote that circulates is, we cannot build algorithmic systems that are better than we are. We can only build what we are today. So Think about that. We can't build utopias. We can only mirror what exists today. Immigrant autistic workers also face coerced consent. So when your visa depends on your job, you can't meaningfully refuse optional monitoring. Again, every request becomes a command. Women, non-binary, autistic people, they're already subject to tone policing, emotional labor. AI that analyzes that communication, well, is going to talk about your collaboration style, your sentiment. It codifies it about how you should speak at work. You have to perform warmth, agreeableness, even in your metadata. Working class autistic workers, you have no room to object. 0-hour contract, gig work, you don't have the luxury of pushing back. This is why I reject any framework that treats surveillance as a universal problem, because it's just recreating an architecture of coercion, because it's already shaped by the existing power structures. And anyone who works or tries to create solutions that does not center the most vulnerable, it protects no one but the one creating it. Now, what's this fiction that we have created that centers consent? We have all these organizations that defend these systems by claiming, well, the workers consented. Let's dismantle that with 3 harsh realities. Consent under duress isn't consent. When accommodation access depends on surveillance, there's no voluntary agreement. And this is most true when it's about disability, where workers have to consent and constantly prove that they deserve support. Disabled people don't have to prove they deserve support. They deserve it inherently from birth. And when they're told, we can provide this accommodation, but we need to monitor how you use it to ensure it's effective, what you hear is, prove you're disabled enough to deserve it and keep proving it forever. That's not, again, consent. That's what we call coercion. But we're going to give you nice paperwork with it. Secondly, consent cannot be permanent. A yes when you're doing onboarding does not authorize every future data expansion after that. And most systems treat that initial agreement as a blanket permission for all upgrades. A tool you agree in January is not the tool monitoring you in December, so you are allowed to rescind. You can withdraw that. Think about that. And if you lack the power to say no without consequences, then your yes, again, is coerced. So sit with that for a moment. Now, let me check my time. It seems like I've got literally a minute left. Now, I use flags when I work with companies these days and ascertain what data is collected. Green flag is minimal data being collected tied to how the tool functions. Yellow flag is what I use when it's behavioral metadata, your timing patterns, your interaction styles. But we go into red flag when we're talking biometric data. Biometric data, and that has to do with continuous monitoring. When I see companies do that, I initially talk to the higher ups and tell them that we're entering European GDPR and it's not to be encouraged. Because if their system is collecting more than it needs to perform, we have to start asking why. And then it becomes legal. And I have to look at how that agreement has been obtained and who is gathering that data. And usually, when I look at that team, it's generally all white people dealing with that. And then I know there was no discussion to even look at why they're doing that. And it's very difficult because that's when people get defensive. And I remind them during the Second World War, we had rooms full of just men. deciding on whether women could actually enter the workplace, and thinking feminism was a bad idea. So, why do we have rooms of all white people making decisions in a world where they are a minority, gathering data on global majority people? And that generally makes people rethink. People tend to think I'm quite anti AI until I let it slip how many companies, both in healthcare and their favorite apps that they like to use, that I have helped develop. I am not anti AI. I'm pro reality and letting people know that if we want to use AI, we should be very realistic and know that human beings are very fallible. Hence, AI is also as fallible as we are. And I like to let them know that even down to assistive AI, it can only be as good as humans are. And since humans are not good, we attempt to be better every day. That is how we should treat AI. It's very fallible as I am, and I'm a flawed human being. We all are. No human is good. We just try each day to be better by looking at how flawed we are today. So with that, I'm going to end it because most of my lecture are advertised as 1 hour and everyone stays for 2 hours. I'm not doing that today.